Hi, my name is Mitch. I work at Laskowski Ace Hardware in Round Lake, Illinois. Today we're going to be going through a few pointers on how to prep your snowblower for this upcoming season. We'll be going through checking your fuel system, checking your ignition, checking your compression. We can even take a quick look at checking your paddles and your belt to make sure that once you get out in the snow, you're not going to have a major issue. The snowblower we're going to be looking at today is a Craftsman. This is actually a single stage unit, but it also has a 4-cycle engine on it, which means the gas and the oil are separate. So we'll check the fuel system, then we're going to go and pull the cover off. We want to be able to get in and check where the spark plug is plugged in and make sure we have a good spark on the engine. And of course we want to check and make sure we have good compression. Most cases, while pulling the rope, you will feel that the engine gives you resistance. You're going to know you have pretty good compression on the engine, which is what we have here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to pull this cover off because we're going to want to drain the fuel system. Normally we have a tool here at the shop we can use to do that, but the average homeowner is not going to have access to that. So we're going to pull this cover off. We're going to disconnect the fuel line, we'll drain the gas out of here, and then we will also pull the bowl nut and drain the carburetor bowl and check the carburetor and make sure that there's not any type of sediment buildup in there. And that way we can make sure that part is all going to be clean. The back panel. What you can do is you can actually set the chute to the forward position so that you can tip the machine forward towards the front and it will rest like that. That way you don't have to worry about the machine falling back on you. And we remove the screws from the back. There's a screw on each side of the wheel, and then there's one up here in this center hole here. And when we take those screws out and we remove the little extender for the choke control, we can take this off. Then we can lift and remove the whole cover by tilting it back and then lifting it up, and then the cover comes off and it exposes the engine for us. So what we want to do now is we're going to tip the machine back on its wheelbase so that we can see where we're at. And you can just kind of walk it forward, whether you're up on a table like this or if you're on the floor, you can tip it back. And now we're back to the wheelbase, and now this machine is stable again, and we can get in here and take a look at draining the fuel out, and then we can also get to the spark plug access here. So you want to use an old pan. What we use here in the shop is an old cake pan sometimes, or an old oil drain pan will work the same way. And what we're going to do is we're going to crack this nut right here on the carburetor bowl, and that will allow us to drain the fuel out through the fuel line and down into the pan. These are standard on this Craftsman model. This is going to be a 10mm nut, so you're going to need a 10mm wrench. You can use a regular socket wrench or a regular box wrench for it. And basically all we want to do is get on and then crack it free, and then you can unscrew this. Now for people who are concerned about getting gasoline and oil on their hands, they do make Sterilite gloves, or little rubber gloves that you can put on. I prefer not to because I like to have the feel for everything that I'm doing. And you can see the gas that's coming out of here is a real bad, ugly gold color, which is telling me the gas inside this carburetor bowl is actually old and flat. And now we're getting to the fresh gas that was added on the top. But if you look at the gasoline that I'm taking out of here now, you can see it has a goldish yellow color to it, which is telling me that this gas has gone flat, it's gone bad. So what's going to happen is the engine will not fire because the gas is no good. So what we want to do now is continue draining the rest of the fuel out. As long as the fuel tank is not full, a pan like this will be fine. If it was a full tank, then I would use a big oil pan, and then I would drain it that way. So we'll let this go for a couple of minutes, and it will drain this old gasoline out. What we did is we removed the nut, we let the gasoline drain through the fuel tank, and then down into the pan. As I said before, if you got a full tank of old gas, then you can use an oil drain pan like one of these. The other thing that we can do now, because we still have a bend in the fuel line, which means there's going to be old gas down caught in this fuel line, we want to get that out of there also. You can take a dirty rag, if you have an air compressor at home with your air gun, put the air compressor nose into the throat of the fuel tank, take your rag, cover it over, and then squeeze. Now you'll see the fuel coming out through the bottom, right out through the carburetor bowl. Once that's sufficiently gone, we know we got almost all of the gasoline out of the carb bowl. The other thing you can do is if you do not have an air compressor at home, you can tip this back forward on its nose like we did to take the cover off. Take a rag, put it underneath the carburetor bowl here, and if you look over on the side here, you're going to see where the fuel hose connects to the carburetor. You can take a pair of needle nose pliers. We can unclip this hose just like this, pull it down out of the way. Then we can go ahead and gently twist and turn. Sometimes they're going to be sticky, so you want to be careful with it. And then pull, and you can disconnect the fuel line. Then you can tip the machine back and drain it back into your pan. But since we've already blown out through the system, we're not going to have any gas in here. We don't need to do that. But then when you're done, just slide the fuel hose back on, take your needle nose pliers, and slide it back up in place. And that will lock it on to the barb coming off of the fuel or off of the carburetor itself, and that will hold that fuel line in place. You don't have to worry about it falling out. The other thing we want to do now, since we have it up here, is we will still take a rag, we'll put it here, because we want to make sure that we don't have any sediment in the carburetor bowl itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this bottom nut on the carburetor bowl. And that's also 10 millimeter. We're going to disconnect that, unscrew this. Now there's a rubber gasket or O-ring up in the top part of this carburetor bowl up through here. So we want to remove this, set it on the side so we don't lose it. And then we're going to remove the bowl itself. You want to do this slowly because this is when you're going to find out. Actually, I'll move my hand down here. You're going to see the brown sediment and residue that's left over. Now sometimes on these carburetors you will get some pitting from our fuel and it will eat on the inside of this carburetor bowl. So we're going to want to clean this out really good. And that's what carb cleaner is made for. So what we'll do is we'll reach around here, grab my handy can of gum up carb cleaner here, do this over something so it's not going to spray all over the place, and we're going to want to spray that out. Shake it out, get all of it that you possibly can. You don't have to dry this out, you just want to make sure that you get the sediment that was in there out of the way. And now you can see that there's no more sediment built up in that carburetor bowl. If you have air compressor at home, just gently point it out of your way. And then you can make sure that you've blown everything else out of the carburetor bowl. So after we clean the bowl out, we're going to want to check the carburetor itself to make sure we don't have what we call an ethanol sludge. Ethanol sludge is what we get when you have the ethanol mixing with the moisture from the atmosphere. It will sink to the bottom of the fuel tank, actually work its way in through the fuel line and into the bottom of the carburetor bowl, and it will be almost like a clear or whitish jelly. So we're going to want to clean that out. But since we already have the bowl out of the way, we can see we don't have that here. I don't like spiders, so he's gone. We'll take our carb cleaner and make sure that you have your little extension tube on here. Go up to the throat of the carburetor. You'll see where the emulsion tube picks up on the middle, on the inside of the carburetor bowl. And we want to spray that out and make sure there's no debris left up in there too. So we'll do that. Make sure you're wearing glasses too, because this will sometimes spray back at you. So that's cleared out of the way. We want to make sure the float's not sticking, so the float is moving freely. Okay, I'm going to grab a flashlight here. And we can check in here and you can see that everything is clear, there's no debris left behind. That's what we want to make sure of. Then the other thing we want to check is this gasket. This is the gasket that the carburetor bowl seats against. We want to make sure it's not torn or it's not broken, because if it is and you put the carburetor bowl back on there and you put both of the nuts back on and you stand the machine up, put gas in it, the gas is actually going to leak through the edge of this bowl and then come out through the carburetor and you'll have a mess. So we want to avoid that if at all possible. So now that we have the carburetor bowl cleaned out and the carburetor itself is cleared, we want to put the bowl back in place. Now you want to position the bowl so that the bottom nut, of course, lines up, and then your drain nut is going to be here on the side. Check and make sure that you don't have any debris left on either one of the seating nuts, and we can screw this back in as soon as I start getting the threads lined up on it. There we go. Hold the bowl in place, tighten your finger tight, take your wrench, and go the rest of the way down. Now what you want to do is you want to snug this, you don't want to super tighten it. So you go through until it seats, and then you want to give it maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of a turn, and that's snug. So that will hold the bowl in place, it won't vibrate free. Then we can put our drain plug back on here. And once again, we just want to get the threads lined up. And I got fat fingers today. Same thing, get it seated and snug it down. And that's basically that. So the carburetor bowl itself is cleared out. Got all the old gas out of there, we're in good shape here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go after the spark plug. So what we want to do is tip the machine back, walk it forward again. It's not that difficult to do. And then we can come over here to where the spark plug boot connects to the spark plug. This sometimes can be a little tricky to take off on these, because sometimes if you try to pull up, you want to watch the edges here, because you can smack your hand on this and trust me, it hurts. Sometimes you just give them a little twist, you'll feel them start to pop free, and then off pops the boot. Now this spark plug sits down here pretty far. So what you're going to need is a wrench with an extension on it in order to pull that out of there. So what I use, and you can use a 3/8 wrench or a 1/2 inch. I like the 1/2 inch one because it gives me a little more grip. And it is a 13/16 socket wrench. So it will fit down in here and fit right onto the spark plug. Just hold it steady with one hand, and then, wow, that one's on there pretty good. So we're going to do this a different way. We're going to get it lined up like so, hold it in place, and then give it a pop. And you'll feel it when it pops it free, but you want to hold it firm because you don't want to crack and break the spark plug in half. Once you get it loose, just unscrew it, and you can take him out. And then there's your spark plug. This spark plug actually is very clean. It hasn't seen a lot of use. So that's a good thing, which means this machine has not seen a whole lot of use. It doesn't have a lot of wear and tear in it. If this was all blackened up in here, that means this machine would have been running rich. I would probably want to change the spark plug at that time, because it will foul out the spark plug and the machine won't start. And we can put our spark plug back in. This is going to be a little tricky at times because, like I say, some of them are down there pretty far. It's kind of hard to reach, so you just got to be patient with it and gently fiddle with it until you feel the threads start to take. Once the threads start to take, make sure they're taking correctly. You do not want to cross thread putting your spark plug back in there. And then you'll feel it as it starts to screw down, that it's in place. Now you can just take your extension with your socket on there and screw it back in place. Once that's seated, we can put our wrench back on, and we just want to snug this down. We do not want to over tighten the spark plug. So we get it in place and we snug it down. And that's basically it. It doesn't have to be super tight. There is a washer on the spark plug itself that's going to compress, and it's actually going to hold that spark plug down in place for you once you snug it in. Then we can take our boot and put that back on. And just like when you took it off, you're just going to line it up. You're going to put it in place, and you're going to twist with it and push until you feel it push all the way down and then lock on. And then it's locked on. So we've got that part taken care of. The other thing we want to do is we want to check and make sure that we don't have any binding here in our carburetor. So this rod up here is actually the throttle control and the governor control, which controls the speed of the engine. So we want to make sure that this is moving freely. If this is sticking, or if you have a problem internally with the carburetor itself, or if the carburetor is completely filled up with gunk, and you're not certain if what you're doing is going to work, then you want to take this over to an authorized service dealer, because he's going to have to remove the carburetor itself. Some of them, like us here, we have an ultrasonic cleaning tank that we can drop this into to clean out the carburetor itself, and that will also free up the throttle plate inside the carburetor, which is what's connected to this linkage. So as long as that's free and moving, the spring that you see here is the governor spring, and that needs to be attached, and that's what controls it and brings it back and forth. As the engine requires more gasoline, it's going to open up and allow more gas to run through the carburetor to keep the engine running properly and at the right RPMs. Now we've checked the carburetor, we've checked the spark plugs, we know we have good compression. The other thing we want to check, since this is a 4-cycle engine, it's gasoline separate here, oil is over here. We want to check and make sure that the oil is up to level and that the oil is clean. Most manufacturers in their owner's manual are going to tell you how often you need to change the oil for how long the machine has run. Most cases they'll tell you after a break-in period of 2 to 4 hours, they require you to change the oil in case there's any impurities that are left over from the factory when they did all the machining work and put everything back together. What we're looking at here though is we've got nice clean oil. We want to make sure that the oil is to the full mark. We don't want to overfill these with oil. If you get them way too high like this, the engine's going to smoke and you're going to think something's broken, and the problem is we just have too much oil. So what I'll find out now is how old is this machine, how often has it been used, and are we required to change the oil at this time. So the question to you is, how long have you guys had this machine? 1 year. So I would recommend changing the oil at this time then, just to make sure that everything's going to be okay. So we can do that, and that's just basically turning this around. If you look on the bottom of the engine here, you're going to see a little square plug on this model. Get rid of this. We'll put our little pan back here. That little square plug is your oil drain plug, and of course you can see it. It says right there, oil drain plug. See the owner's manual, because it will tell you exactly how much oil it's supposed to take and how often you need to change the oil. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop this little plug off of here. Now normally that would take a box wrench, but I'm going to see if I have a socket that will fit that, because it's an inverted socket. And that should be the one I'm looking for. And an inverted socket means the teeth are bent inside instead of outside, as you would see on a normal socket. This one fit on here. We're going to unscrew this plug, and we can drain the oil out through here. Another thing you can do is you can remove this oil cap here, and then tip the machine back, and you can drain the oil. You're going to get about 95% of the oil out that way, so that's why I prefer to use the bottom one. You're going to get a little oil spillage here that's going to run down along the frame here, but we want to open this up, and actually let's loosen the top cap. We'll open this one up, and out comes the oil. Now what you can do is you can tip this back, and it's going to take a couple of minutes for the oil to drain. And you can stand there and hold it, or you can take a 2x4 or something and put it underneath the front of the machine in order to hold it so that the oil will drain. That's coming out with it, and that's why the manufacturer of the engine recommends that every 2 to 4 hours for break-in period you want to drain this oil. So we've pretty much gotten everything out of here that we're going to get out of here, so we can put this drain plug back on. I want to keep the oil pan there for a second though, until I tighten everything down, because as I said, we're going to get some oil that's going to drip down on this frame. And this is the same as everything else. You just want to put this on and then snug it in place. You don't have to be Superman or Supergirl to put it back in. So that's out of the way. So now we'll take our rag and we'll wipe off this residue that we left behind. Because you will always have a little bit left over. Some people see that and they go, oh no, I'm leaking oil, and actually the case is you just got some residue left from behind from when you drain the oil. Now we can take our oil pan, put it out of the way. We're done with that for now. Now most units will take anywhere from 16 to 20 ounces of oil on this model. So what we'll do is we'll pull the dipstick out, wipe it off so that when we go to take an oil sample reading, we'll know if we have the proper amount or not. The manufacturers themselves in the machines sell the bottles. We carry them here at Ace. Craftsman has a brand. Ace Hardware actually has its own brand. That will be either a 20-ounce bottle or maybe a 22-ounce bottle. And most of the time, if you get all the old oil out, that's all you're going to need to refill. But I always tell people, take 2/3 of that bottle, put it in there, wait for a couple of minutes, and we'll check it and see where we're at and see if we have to add any more after that. So I have a large barrel here that I'm going to take oil out of, and the snowblower itself is going to take 5W30 oil. It will tell you that in your owner's manual. You don't want to be using heavy oil or thicker oil because it makes the engine harder to turn over when the weather gets below 32 or 30 degrees. So that's why they recommend that you use the 5W30. So I'm going to take some 5W30 out of our barrel. We're going to add it to the unit. You can pause if you want. So right now we got about 16 ounces of oil, so we're going to add in about 2/3 of that, make sure that our oil level is okay. You can use a funnel if you're not comfortable with tipping it on this close to the machine. But for the most part, your bottle's going to be sealed. You're going to open it up and you're going to add your oil. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add the oil in slow and easy. You don't want to go too fast or it's going to not have enough time to drain through the oil dipstick tube here, and it's going to come up and you'll have oil leaking all over the place. So let's not do that if we can avoid it. So I've gone through about 2/3 of what I had in here. This bottle is actually a different type bottle, but it has the markings on the side, so I go by the markings on the side and I'll fill it to the appropriate amount. Now we can wait for a minute or so, let the oil drain down, get to the bottom of the crankcase, and then we'll take an oil sample reading, or dipstick reading, however you want to call it, make sure that we got the right amount of oil in here. Usually it takes about a minute or so. You'll feel the dipstick where it slides into place on the tube. Twist it, lock it closed, open it up, pull it out. Looking on the bottom of the dipstick tube, you got to look really close, and sometimes you might need a flashlight. Okay, we're not really getting much of a reading on here, and we're still getting too much oil on the side, so that's why we like to wait for a minute and let it drain. We checked the oil level the one time. We're going to check it again now that we let it sit for about a minute, and it should get us a pretty accurate reading on the dipstick tube. Okay, and this one is actually going to be a little bit different than what I thought. We're right to about here where my thumbnail is at. So we're actually going to want to put a little more splash of oil in here just to be on the safe side. You don't want to overfill, but you also do not want to underfill. This engine is air-cooled and oil-cooled, so it has to have both, and the oil has to be the proper amount for it to cool properly. We're going to put a little bit more oil here. So, we added a little more oil. We're going to make sure we're at the right level. And as I said, you check your dipstick and you can see we're just at the high mark, which is right where we want to be. So we're good on our oil. So now that we know that we got our fuel system cleaned out, we know we got good spark, we changed the oil, we're pretty much ready to start the engine. The first thing I want to do before I take it down off of my workbench is I like to tip back and I like to check the paddles. I want to make sure the paddles are not broken or cracked or completely worn away. The other thing I want to make sure of is if you look on the sides here where the paddles are joined on the shaft, you want to make sure that this is not cracked. If any of these are broken, this whole assembly is going to have to get replaced, and you're going to have to take it to your authorized service dealer in order to get the proper part for them to get in here and replace it. So the paddle looks good. The scraper is on the bottom here. The scraper doesn't have any big cracks or gouges out of it. So we're in good shape with the scraper. This model is all set. Some of the models will have what they call a reversible scraper, where if part of this scraper wears out, you can actually take these nuts and bolts off, turn the scraper completely around, reattach it, and then you got a new edge for your scraper. So you always want to check that. The other thing we want to check before we get too far gone here is we want to check and make sure that the belt, which is what drives that auger system off the engine, is in good condition. So what we're going to do, two things you can do here. You can pull the handle back. You can actually try to spin the auger. And if the auger is difficult to turn, as this one is, then we know the belt is grabbing and it's holding. The other thing you want to make sure too is that you have good tension on the spring that connects to the bottom of the auger. Well, what we're going to do now though is we're going to pull this belt cover off, because we want to see the belt and make sure that the belt's in good condition. So to do that, this is also going to be a 10mm socket. We can do that with a drill, you can do it with a hand wrench. And this one, really down in there. And I can't see him. Oh, that one's got a different one. We'll bust my bite my tongue. Okay. Change that one over. This one is the same. And this one on the bottom should be the same. Sometimes by doing this, you can pull this back and you can see the belt itself. But with this one, with this having that larger nut up on the top, we're actually going to pull that nut off of there. And that looks like it's going to be a 7/16. 7/16. I learn something new every day. It's going to be 1/2 inch. That's in there pretty good. So we'll take our wrench. Ooh, here's a new one, Ted. They changed this. So we really take the 2 bolts out of here, take the bolt out of the top, and we can remove the cover, and now we got access to the belt. Now on the belt, what you want to check is to see if there's any cracks, just the same as if you were looking at your pulleys. Make sure there's no breaks, no rotting, no splits in the belt like this, or that the belt is burning away. Okay? We want to take a quick turn around. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. There we go. Let's release this handle a little bit, take some of the tension off. And now we can spin the belt. And we can see we don't have any cracks in it. You can do it that way, or you can do it this way. You can pull on the handle, and then you can watch the belt as it's spinning. And you see if there's any cracks in the belt. If you don't see any cracks in the belt's in good shape. You can put the cover back on. And we're going to be ready to put some gas in here and fire it up. So we'll take a minute, this back forward, and we'll get everything hooked back up. And hopefully we're not going to have an issue with this. Because there is one separate step, but I don't like going through that with people. Go. So we're going to wipe off the last of the excess oil here. And we're going to put this cover back on. There's 2 slots here and 2 tabs here. And we'll slide down into those slots and we'll lean forward. Make sure that we get it in the right position under the lip there, which is what we want. So you got the 3 screws that we took out, which we're going to put back in right now. So we put in the last screws that we're holding it on. And just gently, you don't need to over tighten them. Make sure this one up there on the top is snug in now. And there we go. Now we're all set. Now we can lean it back down, we'll take it off the bench, we'll put some gas in it, and we'll be ready to go. The timing is perfect. You can pause. Alright, so we're all set. We're going to put fresh gas in. because we're just starting off. Now my gas has already been treated. I put some fuel stabilizer in there, so if it doesn't snow right away, maybe in a month or so, it's still going to be able to start. So we got that taken care of. We'll put our gas cap back on. Make sure your key that you have is pushed into the slot where it's supposed to go. Then put our little choke extension back on before we forget that. It makes it a little easier for us. And we're going to turn it to the choke position. Now we can pull start or electric start, but we're going to want to hit the primer. 1, 2, 3. Give her a pull. So now that we got everything set on it, this is ready and prepped for the winter time. If you're uncomfortable doing this type of work, if there's something in here that seems it might be a little bit more than what you're willing to do, you can always take it to a local ACE if they do the service work, as we do here in Round Lake, or you take it to an authorized service dealer and they can do the service for you. If any other time that you have an issue with it you don't understand, I always recommend that you check with an authorized service dealer. Anyhow, that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching, and good luck this snow season.